Hello, and welcome to episode 56 of Expertise is Overrated, the podcast that takes the time to answer the questions you didn't know you didn't want the answer to. I'm Vib.
And I'm Sean, and neither of us has any clue what we're talking about. Except this week I'm quite excited, because this is a topic you and I talk about quite frequently.
We actually know a bit about this, don't we? Well, I mean we say that.
We've both read the books and seen the films, so I think that's maybe...
I've actually read these as well. How crazy is that?
Which is quite scary.
I know. We're revisiting a universe that we're quite fond of. I mean, our second ever episode on this show was about Lord of the Rings, wasn't it?
Mm.
And it's still one of your favourites, even though it was utter nonsense.
I think it's just... It highlights really well the sort of depths of insanity that the show can get to when we really put our mind to it.
I think that's absolutely right. It was a great episode. It was really fun to record as well.
Yeah, if you want to expose someone to sort of raw expertise is overrated, there's a few places you can go. I think the Marcone episode that we recorded very recently, episode 52, is one of them. But alternatively, go all the way back to Aragorn has no claim to the kingdom of Gondor, just because that was, as you say, it was so much fun.
It was also crazy, and you get to monologue, so...
Yeah, and I got to talk for a long time, which I really enjoy.
So if you are new here, and you haven't already switched off, then yeah, go and check that out. But also stay and listen to this one.
Yeah, check it out after you've listened to this one.
Or if you go now, then come back. All right, yeah. We're losing track here, aren't we?
Listen to all of our episodes. That's what we're saying.
Listen to them all, rate them all, like them all, download them all, do all the things.
Tell us what you think. Mostly, though, download them.
Yes, Lord of the Rings.
This week we're talking about, I think in very broad terms, changes made by Peter Jackson when adapting The Lord of the Rings to the 3 films adaptation. Is that right? I've bungled that sentence terribly.
You have
to put that on sentence. On sentence, on silence. Excuse me.
You have, and I feel you've also given Peter Jackson a lot of credit. And you've left out poor Philippa Boyens and Fran Walsh, given that they did a lot of the writing for the films.
I have. I sort of both praise and blame Peter Jackson exclusively for The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which is unfair of me. I know, but it's the problem of being the sort of central creative figure as identified by the media. Like, obviously, any film, any TV show has hundreds of people working behind the scenes, but it sort of all rests either with the director or the showrunner or the writers, I suppose. Certainly for Lord of the Rings, I think of them as Jackson's Lord of the Rings.
I mean, sure. This bodes well for the amount of nonsense I'm sure you're going to come up with. And also have no bad things said about Peter Jackson. He's made 3 phenomenal films, and no more than 3.
I don't know. Brain Dead is pretty good. Have you ever seen that?
To be fair, the only Jackson films I've seen are The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and then King Kong.
Jackson's King Kong is quite something. What I think is insane, before we get on to Lord of the Rings, is if you look at Jackson's work before The Lord of the Rings, he was making like weird cult B-movie horror shit that's like really bad. And someone at New Line went, let's give this guy all of the money and all of our trust to go and make a fantastic, like 3 5-hour-long fantasy epic films. Yeah, it'll be fine.
Must have been a great meeting, right? Because ultimately, I think New Line must have been like, we really want to shoot it in New Zealand because it's very Middle-earthy. Who have we got out there? Oh, this guy.
No, I think it was we want to shoot it in New Zealand because it's really cheap.
Yeah, that will have helped.
But have you heard about the pitch meeting? So there's an urban legend. I don't know how much of this is true, but when Jackson was pitching New Line the film, I think he was pitching them one film for the whole 3. It may not have been Jackson, it may have been the writers. Someone pitched one film.
Yeah, I do vaguely remember hearing that.
And it just so happened that one of the suits in the room had recently finished reading Lord of the Rings with their like 10 or 11-year-old kid. And so I was like, hold on, you want to do one film? Yeah, but aren't there 3 books? Yeah. Okay, do you want to make 3 films? Yes, please. Sure, go do that. That was it. That like we nearly didn't get it. If but for that sort of random chance of someone having recently read them, we wouldn't have got the 3 films.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always stuff like that, right? In the great events in life. No, I'd love to have been in the room when they would have had like a progress meeting and they're like, so how much CGI are you using? It's like, oh, not much at all. Really, we're using props. You just see the new line, people going, oh no. And a great decision it was.
Yeah, fantastic. What we want to talk about today, though, other than heap praises upon the 3, I'm going to argue 3 of the best fantasy films ever made.
I think the 3 best fantasy films ever made.
I think it is the 3 best fantasy films ever made.
I challenge you, listeners, to come up with a better fantasy film.
I'm going to make unpopular here. The only one I'm going to argue with is Star Wars, but that was for another day.
A demonstrably worse film. But yes, let's go on.
Let's move on.
Let's not have another one of these, shall we?
You can keep your headphones in. We're not talking about Star Wars. No, what we want to do is we want to talk about the changes made from book to film. Which ones we think land and which ones we think perhaps don't land as well as they might have done.
And before you pick up your pens, there are a lot of changes, and we're not going to be able to cover them all because there are a lot of changes. And some are very nuanced and some are quite big. I think we're probably focusing on the big ones, maybe? Is that fair?
We are. I mean, there's so many that we wouldn't be able to do, all of Fellowship in our usual episode length. So we got to focus on the big ones, I think.
So we've actually made a list, which, if you're new here, that's very unusual for us.
Planning. We don't do that very often.
But yeah, I mean, having a list means nothing ultimately. I'm sure we're not going to
stick to
leave it halfway through. But yeah, so the changes between the books and the films, we're not really going to. I don't know. I guess we are sort of doing this chronologically of sorts, aren't we? So
vaguely, I guess. Before we dive in, though, do you think, on the whole, the changes make the films better or worse than if it had been a direct, as line by line adaptation as you could do?
That's such a hard question to answer.
I know.
I think the only way I can answer that is to say that I think the films are phenomenal. So by virtue of that, I think the changes all land very well.
That's a decent cop out that I think I'll allow you. I think I'd go further. I think that the changes make the films better fundamentally. I think there are a few changes that do a lot of harm or have the potential to do a lot of harm. But I think on the whole...
Are you saying they make them better than the book, or they make the films better films because of the changes?
Make the films better films than if you had one-to-one adapted the books.
I think that's probably fair.
I don't think I'd go so far as to say that the films are better than the books, because I don't think that's a meaningful comparison, because you're comparing 2 very different forms of media. What I will say is I asked my wife, I was talking to my wife about this before recording, and she said that she doesn't know what changes ultimately were made because she's only read 1.5 books of Lord of the Rings, but she's watched all 3 films more than once. So whatever the changes were, they made it better, which is pretty compelling. Yeah, to be honest.
I mean, they are just phenomenal films, aren't they? And people do bitch about the changes that were made, so I guess that's one of the things we'll be addressing. But yeah, I mean, they're just great films, aren't they? I feel I've mentioned this on the show before, but there's only one scene in, I think, all 3 extended films at that, but that's the only version you should be watching anyway, that I genuinely dislike. And we'll come on to it, I'm sure. But
you see, I was talking to someone relatively recently who said, more or less, I have the same view as you. The extended editions are the best way to watch it, but the cinema experience of the theatrical release is better. They are better paced. I think that's probably true.
Well, but knowing that the extended edition exists, you just can't go back. I think
that's probably also true.
But saying that, I still vividly remember being in the cinema for all 3 films when they first came out.
Absolutely.
Which I think is saying something given how long ago that is now. I went to see The Return of the King twice.
That's really impressive.
I know. I don't think I've ever done that with a film. I've been cinema twice. So
I don't think I have. Anyway. The first... Well, I think the first change we can deal with quite quickly is a sort of... It takes, in the books, the hobbits a very long time to leave the Shire. And there's this great plot around selling Bag End and buying a house at Crick Hollow, and there's a hobbit called Fatty Bolger involved. And it's really convoluted.
Yes.
And none of that happens in the film. Gandalf's like, you got to go. And Frodo goes, should we go tonight? And then he grabs Sam and they're off. And it's like, okay, yeah, well done.
Yeah, so yeah, that's
I cut 250 pages of book.
And what's funny about that is I think Fellowship of the Ring is where some people switch off in the films, right? Because they're like, it's taking forever. But you have the party, and then Gandalf goes to and from Gondor in, I don't know, like a 5-minute montage. Tells Frodo to go, and he goes, as you say. Whereas in the book, 17 years pass.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Isn't it like 20 years in the book?
Yeah. And then Frodo is 50 at this point.
Yeah.
And he's like, maybe it's a good adventure, good time to have an adventure.
I think that's also a point to make. Like, Frodo is old. He's not old because hobbits live a really long time, but he's like a lot older than the hobbit that Elijah Wood is playing.
Yeah, so he's like a young adult for hobbit terms, right? Being 50-ish. And what I think is really interesting in the books that they changed in the films, obviously, is the dynamic between the 4 hobbits. The ultimate forms where Frodo is by far the oldest. I think the next nearest is probably Merry, and he's like 14 years younger. Right. And Frodo's very much the leader, and he's just wiser and more knowledgeable about things. I don't actually know how old Sam is, but he might be the youngest, no?
I think Pippin's the youngest.
Yeah, Pippin's the youngest, yeah.
But I might be being swayed by the films.
It's hard to know, because in the films, Sean Astin is just like the fatherly figure of the 4, right? And
yeah, cooking them all breakfast.
And, this is a change, and I think it really works. Those 4 on screen really work very well together.
Yeah, and they're like still really good mates as well, which is great.
That is really cool to see, yeah.
There's all sorts of class elements going on in the books as well, aren't there? Because Frodo is like a landed gentry.
Hobbit type. Politics in the books is just...
It doesn't make a huge amount of sense. I'm not diving into where does Frodo's income come from, but like he's definitely posher than Sam is.
Yeah, but they sort of sneak that into the film a little bit.
Case in the film, but it's a lot more pronounced in the books, right? In the film, it's like they're really good friends, whereas in the books, it's very much more like Sam is his. Well, I think Tolkien described him as a Batman, which is like a soldier who looks after an officer type thing.
Yeah, like a sort of ward or a...
Yeah,
exactly, kind of a gopher, really, in some ways.
Yeah, just like I'm going to use a slightly disparaging term, but a sort of general dog's body.
Yeah, a little bit. But also his gardener.
also, and most importantly, his gardener.
But I think so. Where this becomes relevant, which I think is one of the big themes that they changed, is just the overall view of the world as it stands, right? At the time that they discover that they have the One Ring.
Yeah.
Like in the films, which I think works really well because it's an introduction to, oh shit. But in the books, it's sort of, the whole world kind of knows more, I feel, is the way of saying it.
There's more of a sense of creeping doom, I think, in the books. Like, I don't know, is that quite right? I know what you mean.
They're really, well, jumping the gun potentially, or throwing our list out the window, but it's the Gandalf problem, which we'll come on to, I think, in more detail later. But in the books, Gandalf knows essentially from the get-go what's happening, right? Because he's been working against this evil for many, many, many years. So he's ready for this. Whereas in the films, it's sort of like, this opportunity has arisen. What do we do? What is going on? And it's like,
I think that's right.
The viewer is sort of like, oh yeah, this is enticing and engaging. And then you have this really young hobbit who's going to go off on an adventure, and he seems not ready for it because look how young he is, and so on and so forth. And it works, I think.
I think it does. It absolutely does.
Be sort of hard sell in a film, like, especially at the start of a 9-hour long slog where the hero is just like, yeah, I know what I have to do. I'm going to do it. So yeah,
guess I gotta go.
Yeah.
Gotta go on a long walk then.
Yeah. And then you have Death Stranding, which I'm told is a great game, so maybe that would have worked as well.
Maybe. It's a weird game. I think the pacing change to the start works really, really well. Even though, I mean, you could probably speed it up a little bit more, although I'm not sure.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it's massively sped up, but it's still quite slow for some people.
Yeah.
Imagine having Tom Bombadil in that whole sequence in there.
Well, that brings us really neatly on to Tom Bombadil, doesn't it?
You'd have a mass exodus, I think, from the cinemas.
I might have walked out.
Me too.
I probably wouldn't, but we've spoken about Tom Bombadil on the podcast before. I just don't see how you can do it. I don't see how you make Tom Bombadil work on screen.
Even in the book, it doesn't really work. Tom Bombadil is that. He's the evidence for the fact that Tolkien was creating a universe, and so sometimes he just put too much in certain things and didn't finish most of what he was working on because it was so fast.
That was exactly my point when we were speaking about Bombadil, right? The reason Tom Bombadil is in The Lord of the Rings, the reason he's in Fellowship is because the hobbits walk through where Tom Bombadil lives.
Yeah.
Like, just any other author goes, I guess Tom Bombadil doesn't live there because that's complicated. Tolkien, nah. In you get, son.
So in a modern day video game, that would be a side quest that's like really tenacious. It's like, I'm here, side quest, come do me. But you can technically walk past it, but of course,
just walk past it.
In the books of Tolkien, no. Not only does he rescue them once, he comes back a second time.
He rescues them twice, and I think this is a slightly harder change to sell. Right, the Barrow Downs. I think the Barrow Downs are really creepy and evocative and really good on the page, but
not with the change that they made to Frodo. I think you can't make Frodo a young, inexperienced guy and then have him quite calmly rescue everyone in the Barrow Downs. It just doesn't really work.
No, and I also don't see how you get everyone out of the Barrow Downs if you don't have Tom Bombadil, because no one else other than maybe Gandalf can do that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
Unless Aragorn, but...
That's what I was thinking, but no.
But you're having your Aragorn moment at Weathertop. That's where you see how badass Aragorn is. And it's a different kind of badassery, right?
It is. Plus, you wouldn't get the amazing scene of just him smoking a pipe in the corner and looking really menacing.
That's true. And then you don't get the first evidence of Sam's courage as well. I'll have you, Longshanks.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But not just Sam, to be fair. Like, all the hobbits do charge in.
Not just Sam.
He delivers the knockout line.
The great line. But because you don't have the Barrow Downs, you don't have the Dagger of Westerness, which I guess it doesn't matter, but it comes back to... We've got Gandalf versus the Witch King much further down the line, and there's stuff about the Witch King in general, so maybe we can talk about that there. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, something like the Daggers of Westerness, it's like... It works again in the books because you can expand on it, but in the film, they just get given a dagger by Galadriel, and they're like, yeah, that'll do. And it's not even that the dagger is special in any way, it's just... the person wielding it is...
That's the difference, isn't it? In the books... Merry stabs the Witch King with the Dagger of Westerness, and then you have a paragraph so past the Dagger of the Barrow Downs. Glad would be its creator who forged it, yada, yada, yada. you don't have time or space or even really the medium to do that.
Exactly.
In film. So
exactly.
What are you going to do? Are you going to say at the Council of Elrond, "Oh, you guys have magic daggers that can unravel spells that bind wraiths together"? It's just going to feel shoehorned in.
It's like, oh, by the way, there's a lot of magic that we're not going to talk about ever again.
Exactly.
So axing Tom Bombadil, I think, is hands down one of the best changes made in the films.
I think we've probably just lost a load of listeners who love Tom Bombadil and think not including him was a crime. But
he has a place in the books, and I think he's a super interesting character. But I would sometimes also go as far as saying he's worth skipping in the book.
If you know he's there, you don't need to read about him.
Yeah.
It's probably fair because it is just a pause in the narrative.
It just is, yeah. It's just getting sidetracked on something completely irrelevant in many ways. Axing Tom Bombadil, great chat. But much like, as you said, axing a lot of the general Shire nonsense.
Yeah. So at the moment, all we're doing is cutting.
Yeah. And it's working. Then I guess if we continue this timeline, we're cutting another fan favourite character.
Well, we actually cut two, so we've forgotten about that. Well, not forgotten perhaps, but there's the meeting that Frodo and Sam have with Gildor.
Yes.
In the books, which happens very differently.
They did film that, didn't they?
Well, in the extended edition, Frodo and Sam watch some elves.
Yeah, they watch, but I think they film
some dialogue that never made it even into the extended.
Exactly, but I think there's a petition currently, I think, for like the super extended, or it's like been announced or something, where there's like literally everything that was ever filmed.
Release the lost footage,
because the films aren't quite long enough.
I don't know. I've got they've generally, so they take Gildor out, which I think is fine because especially as you say, with this younger, less experienced, less wise Frodo, you don't need the opportunity to show that Frodo is wise and able to converse with elves and elvish and things like that.
Yeah. Which
is what Gildor gives you in the books. But then we come to the axing of, well, as you say, fan favourite, Glorfindel.
Old Glorfindel, yeah. Who's, to be fair, another very confusing character in many ways, because he's a first-age elf who's just sort of chilling still.
Just a first-age elf sent back with even greater power than your average first-age elf. He's a sort of proto-Maya.
Yeah. See, what's interesting, because in the book, obviously, his arrival is very obvious, because he is a first-age elf, and I think just looking upon a first-age elf is like nothing you would ever experience.
But also because Frodo is slipping into the unseen world, he's able to see Glorfindel as he is on the other side.
Yeah.
So he gets the radiance, the shining stone on the breast, all of that. And then I think we hear later from Gandalf that at one point Glorfindel sort of unmasked himself to put the wraiths to flight. And when he rides against them at the ford. And it's all just really confusing.
Yeah, in some ways, yeah. But in the books, it's just harking back to this whole idea of like, oh yeah, the elves they're still here, and they are a force to be reckoned with, which fits in very well with the narrative of, you know, the elves having picked up their rings ever since Sauron fell and actually defending Middle-earth.
Yes.
Since the Battle of the Last Alliance, which is something that they completely ignore in the films. And this is why Arwen is a little bit confusing, right? Because she arrives and is all glowy and elven and magical. But then they sort of portray all the elves as having kind of just given it up, you know? Like Elrond is a particularly egregious example of this, I think.
I don't know that I entirely agree with that. I think... Well, Elrond says that the light of the Eldar is fading. So I think it's more that they don't have the strength they once had, which I think is different from in the books. Because in the books, doesn't Elrond say that if the ring stayed in Rivendell, all else would fall, and then Rivendell would fall as the last defense against the enemy type thing, which isn't the sense that you get in the films. You get the sense in the films that Rivendell is fading and empty and dying, which it's sort of not in the books. Ditto Lorien.
Yeah, I think what's missing from that line is, the light of the Eldar is fading in Middle-earth. Because they're all just leaving, which I think that's entirely fair. Well, certainly the Noldor are, but let's face it, everyone I think only cares about the Noldor, so...
You're such an elf fanboy, it's ridiculous.
I mean, they are the strongest race, what can I say? It's almost like the world was created for their shenanigans. But no, Glorfindel, I think, would have been... I mean, that's just introducing another character that you will then see for all of 2 minutes.
I think that's there's 2 things that it buys you. Well, 3 things that it buys you. It buys you the introduction of a character who is ultimately more important than Glorfindel in Arwen. It buys you the sense that the elves are capable of acting against the enemy, but it's difficult for them. And it shows you a bit of the relationship between Aragorn and Arwen that becomes relevant later. So, by contrast, putting Glorfindel in is fun and cool, and he's a bit badass. But ultimately, one of them has to act as a taxi service to get Frodo from
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
the troll camp to Rivendell. If you're going to do that, you might as well use a character you can use later.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I think we'll I guess we'll come back to this maybe with the Scouring of the Shire, that sort of thing. But in the books, having Glorfindel there, I think, is still a very strong signal that, the West is not for your taking, Sauron. You're not ready for this shit.
Yeah, I mean...
Which is a great message in the books, because, there's obviously a lot else going on in the extended universe of Middle-earth.
Yes.
But you don't want to deal with that in the film, and that's absolutely fine.
And that's the other challenge. If you show Glorfindel as capable of riding against the Nine, the stronger question then becomes, where is he for the rest of the film? Why isn't he in the Fellowship, etc., etc.? And the simple answer is because,
as well.
well, because someone's got to stick back and defend Rivendell is probably the answer. And also, there's the point that Glorfindel shines so brightly on the other side, Sauron would see him coming, which is a sort of point that's half made by Elrond. But you don't need to deal with that if you don't have Glorfindel.
Yeah,
like it's exactly. Again, it's just tighter, it's neater.
No, it's really great screenwriting, I think, as you've said it.
Yeah.
You're introducing a character that's going to be relevant for the duration of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And now, the nature of her relevance and the relationship she has with Aragorn, I think, is a problem. But we can put a pin in that as well.
Yeah.
We put in many pins, so if you're listening, tell us how many things we actually came back to and how many things we forgot about.
Make sure we come back to at least some of them.
That's a big one, though. I think we will come back to that. But yeah. So we've axed a lot of characters from the books in favor of others, or just leaving them altogether in the films. And I think we seem to both agree that was a good choice all round.
True. Every change like this, though, you do lose some of the depth of the Lord of the Rings. Right, Glorfindel. Tom Bombadil, Fatty Bolger, Crick Hollow, all of that, the Old Forest, Old Man Willow, they serve to build a deeper, richer world.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Which is not necessarily the sense that you get from the films.
For sure, but it's the same sort of thing that season 1 of Game of Thrones did, right? Look at all these characters and how great they are, and then by season 8, it's like there's 5 characters in the whole world because you just don't have time.
No, I completely agree, but I'm just saying, yes, we sound like we agree with all the changes, because I think broadly speaking we do, but we do recognise that you're losing something with each of these changes.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to be a film, ultimately, and the films are already comically long, especially for the time.
And that's fundamentally what you've always got to hark back to, is, are people going to feel like sitting through this scene was worth the time of the scene?
Yeah. So, I mean, we are making our way out of the Shire. I think if we're doing this chronologically. And this is where I wrote Frodo, oh Frodo, which I think is just, we sort of made the point, right? Frodo, they changed the character quite significantly from the books to the film, but actually I think it really works on screen. So
Yes.
well done. And they stuck to that. I think it was quite consistent writing. So well done. Now, actually one thing that happens while they're still in the Shire, or...
so I'd say we come to our first edition.
Yeah, when the hobbits are on their way to Bree, the old wizarding duel.
This is so much fun.
I mean, who doesn't want to see Ian McKellen and Christopher Lee, two knights of the realm, going at it,
chewing on chewing on scenery, having a great time, as far as I can tell. My favourite bit of that scene, I've said it before, is when the first 3 doors have been closed on Gandalf by Saruman, and he keeps trying for more doors. He's like, what about... Oh, no, I can't get to that one. What about... No, not that one.
It's clearly just a game that they would play. Right? It's like the old Gandalf, the old Saruman prank.
Oh, he's closed all the doors.
And then they throw down, and it's excellent.
It's really, really good, because it's such an old man fight.
It's such
the
an old
worst thing
man
that
fight.
seems to happen is they just fall over.
Like, it looks like they're throwing huge amounts of power around, and all that happens is like they fall over.
Trip up.
But you get Christopher Lee in his booming voice, saying, "You've chosen the way of pain." Oh, yeah, great.
And he sends Gandalf flying up the tower, and I've got no idea what happens when he gets to the top, but it doesn't matter. I think that's really
I wonder
good.
that every single time. It's like, doesn't he just get smashed into the ceiling and then what? Whereas in the books, he just gets calmly escorted by some dudes.
Yeah, there's no fight. Saruman's just like, no, get on the roof. And I was like, well, okay.
But it's very much implied that he sort of gets to the roof in the book and then instantly gets on the seagull and goes away. It's like, what's the whole point of this?
Okay, bye.
No, but so obviously they added a great duel, but I think what they really added, which the film I think desperately needed at this point, was a genuine villain.
Yes.
Right? Because it's all smouldery in the books and it works. And Saruman is so much more complicated, right? Saruman of many colours, Is he
Saruman,
making sense?
Ringmaker.
Exactly. Like, is he making sense? Are the things he's saying actually, kind of right?
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing. Maybe Gandalf will have a bit of doubt. And of course, in the books, he doesn't, because he's Gandalf, and doubt is not a word in his vocabulary. But in the film, at this point, you're just sort of... Yeah, you've seen Sauron, but like, he's dead, right?
Yeah.
And the ring's too amorphous, so this works.
Yeah, it condenses the threat of the first film into a specific person, whom later in the film we see acting against the Fellowship. It's really well done.
Yeah, massively, and it being Christopher Lee, all the better.
All to the good. The way he narrates his own entrance as well. Smoke rises from the Mountain of Doom, and Gandalf the Grey rides to Isengard, seeking my assistance, as he's walking down the stairs. And I'm like, wait, hold on a second. Have you just been talking to yourself from the top of that 20-foot staircase?
Yeah, no, because it's the voice of Saruman, so like everyone will have heard.
Yeah, in your great booming baritone. It's amazing.
There are people waking up in Edoras being like, what the fuck was that?
Gandalf the who?
Gandalf Grey.
No, I like the changes to Saruman. I think Saruman of many colours, much like everything, when you've got the time in the book to deal with the complexity and look at what is Saruman trying to do, works really well. But just condensing it down to, this is a fight we can't win, we should join with Sauron. Yeah, cool. I can buy that from a wizard. Everyone loves the evil wizard trope. Perfect.
Absolutely, and I think, as much as I love him, doing away with Radagast Brown altogether makes a lot of sense, because that's just, as you said before, it's just another character that you have to explain. And so essentially they're setting up like Gandalf the Grey second, because he's grey, Saruman the White first, because he's the white. And so later on, when Gandalf comes back as the White, people are like, okay, maybe he's now the big badass.
I'm Saruman as he should have been.
Exactly.
Yeah. works.
Yeah, it works really well. Unfortunately, though, I think the way they wrap up Saruman's storyline, especially in the cinematic releases, well, they just don't wrap it up at all.
Just nothing happens to him.
That even though they made him the villain, or at least a major villain, then just leaving his story unended is kind of bad.
You don't get much resolution to that story.
No.
I think the resolution of the extended edition should just be in the theatrical. Like, it's not a wholly satisfying resolution.
I mean, it does the job, right? It's 5 minutes.
He's done in by his own tool,
yeah.
Essentially. He fails to recognise the threat of essentially a creature that he made, and it kills him.
Yeah, no, the cinematic release, I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, did they just forget about Saruman?
That's a baffling change, I think.
I guess it's a sort of, where do you put it, right? Because I don't think you can put it at the end of Two Towers. So they stick it at the beginning of the extended editions of Return of the King.
Yeah.
But it's also like,
at that point, who cares? Because it's clear
over.
that
Yeah.
Sauron is the threat. Yeah.
Like, you want to end on Gandalf saying, his wrath will be terrible, his retribution swift, and then focus on Sauron and not go back to Saruman and deal with that.
Yeah.
But
it's a very retrograde step.
Yeah, you need to resolve it. But the wizard duel, fantastic.
Top notch. It's pretty vanilla from most of the rest of Fellowship. You take a lot of little stuff out, like the crone at Mirrormere and things like that. But that's window dressing, right? That's not major changes. That's just cutting stuff that's decent lore.
Yeah. They sort of hype up Galadriel as being extra weird, maybe, in the films.
True.
But
no,
I don't mind that at all. I think Moria and all that stuff is pretty faithful. Although the purists, I'm sure, will argue about the specifics of that, given that in the books Gandalf suggests they go through Moria. Gimli's not really that fussed.
No, it's not Gimli.
Aragorn is saying, let's go over Caradhras. All these sort of things. But
yeah,
doesn't really matter.
No, I don't think so. Legolas recognises the Balrog. There's a great scene where Aragorn and Boromir stand against the Balrog until Gandalf gets them to piss off, which I think is quite good. There's actually a lot of sort of subtly bigging up Boromir, I think, in Fellowship that we don't necessarily see in the film. So I was reading a post about this recently. So in Moria, when the Balrog first reveals itself and Legolas drops his arrow and Gimli covers his face in fear, the two people that spring forward to stand with Gandalf against the Balrog are Aragorn with Andúril in hand and Boromir, who blows the horn of Gondor in sort of answer to the Balrog's roar.
Yeah. Which
I think is just such a cool little Boromir moment and Aragorn moment, to be fair, that we don't get.
Yeah, we get an inkling of it, right?
Sure.
Because Gandalf tells Aragorn, not so much Boromir, I suppose, but he tells Aragorn to just leave because, this foe is beyond any of you. What I think is a little bit odd in the film, perhaps, is that Gandalf just knows ahead of time what's in Moria. I don't think that's a known fact that there's a Balrog there.
I think it's I don't think anyone knows that Durin's Bane is a Balrog. No.
Which makes it kind of weird in the film, because it's like, there's a Balrog there, and yet you don't vocalize that. You go there.
Yeah, when it's like, let the ring bearer decide, by the way, what's here is like me, but evil and probably stronger.
The biggest evil left in this world, probably.
Yeah, at least of level with Sauron. Should we go there? What do you reckon?
Yeah, Sauron as he is currently, for sure. I think Balrog probably matches him, really.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point about Boromir. sort of being subtly bigged up in the books. I think you're right. In the film, he's much more just, this is a man, this is what men are like currently, and they're all flawed.
And also Boromir was there. You don't get the Boromir is the greatest of his... But for Aragorn, Boromir is the greatest living man. I think you don't get that sense. He's just another bloke who's there to make Aragorn look good, which is sort of fine because you want him to fall in it.
Because what you do in the books, right, is you change Aragorn's character, and this is a big one we'll be talking about, I'm fairly sure.
Yes.
You change Aragorn's character, so what you have to, by virtue of doing that, change Boromir's character. And I think they essentially just scale them both down, so it kind of makes sense.
They do.
To Boromir's detriment, for sure. Although they save it pretty well in Amon Hen, I think. His death speech is... I mean, it's a classic.
Yes. My brother, my captain, my king.
Fantastic.
Brings a tear to my eye every time.
Absolutely. And in this, I mean, I might as well cover it here, but this is a change. I don't know if I like this change, but it sort of, again, makes cinematic sense, right? Where Boromir is very clearly killed by, Lurtz, the Uruk-hai captain, who we've had weird shots of throughout the film.
It's similar to Saruman, isn't it? What you're doing is you're condensing threat into a single recognizable individual. And it's like there's always a chief henchman in a James Bond film that James Bond has to kill before he can get to the villain. Exactly. This is what Lurtz is.
He's an Uruk-hai so special, he's the only one who gets a bow.
Whereas I think in the books we don't see Boromir die, but I'm fairly sure he's killed by like flights of arrows.
Yeah, well, we just see him dead or dying, surrounded by countless bodies of Uruk-hai and many arrows in him and the horns cleaved and so on. So he just dies a really heroic death in sort of just outnumbered, hopelessly outnumbered, defending...
And to be fair, his death in the film is incredibly heroic as well. Like,
yes, yeah.
He gets that heroic ending, but
because you have to kind of show it on screen, you can't just have it be a random Uruk, right? Because that's demeans it. Even if you have like 10 of them just pounce on him, it's not the same. You need to, as you say, condense it into one character. Because
what you also need to do is you need to give Aragorn the revenge, essentially the revenge kill of Boromir's killer, so that Aragorn can then essentially have the conversation with Boromir.
Yes. And you also get to do the shield throw into the tree, which is one of the sort of... I think he sprinkles them in every now and then, does Jackson, like these crazy over-the-top action sequences, and I love them, they're great.
Yeah. The knife deflect, which is really good.
He did that in real life?
Yes.
It's because he's a moron. Viggo Mortensen knows.
It was a stunt knife.
You don't know. He might have switched it before.
No, it was so he was trying... There's a really good... Because the story that goes round was that the actor playing Lurtz accidentally let go of the knife in the shot, and Viggo Mortensen had to deflect it and got lucky because it was a real knife. Actually, what happened was Viggo Mortensen's stunt double was practicing the shot and couldn't make it. So they just decided to try it with Viggo Mortensen. And he made the swing first time, and his stunt double was like, I fucking hate him. Like he did it with no practice. The man is not normal.
Yeah, I mean, he has been walking around in his getup for ages. he knew everything.
Feeding Bill the pony in his trailer, which is, I think, my favourite photo.
Viggo, what a hero. What an absolute hero.
What a ridiculous human being.
Yeah. No, so, I mean, Boromir's death, I think, that's a good cinematic change for sure. And then also just, having his send-off at the end of Fellowship as opposed to in Two Towers.
I think that's right. It caps that film really well.
Yeah, massively. It really sets it up as a sort of, okay, we have our new mission, which is save Merry and Pippin.
Yes. I will forever think that Fellowship a little bit gets Boromir wrong. But again, I think I can forgive the film given where it ends up. I don't think you get the sense of how big a deal Boromir is in Fellowship.
No, but this is a change in the entire film series, right? Is that men, especially the men that we see, their flaws are way bigged up.
I think that's absolutely true.
Right? Boromir, super flawed, only, super fallible, gets really swayed by the ring, and that's sort of all we see of him.
It's only resolved at the very end at his death.
Faramir, same story, right? And we're coming on to that pretty much now.
Yeah.
Aragorn, same story, just conflict, insecurity, just awful. Denethor, they really assassinated his character in the films.
Yes.
So, and it's a theme not just with the men, but the elves as well. Touched on Elrond briefly, but like he's just not the same by any means.
Everyone is humanized, and I don't necessarily mean that in a positive way. Tolkien's characters are a lot of them are so sure of themselves, so firm in their convictions, so much larger than life, and none of them really are in the films. I'm going to get that wrong constantly, but Aragorn in the books never experiences a moment of self-doubt, really. And at one point, I'm fairly sure Gandalf says that Aragorn, at the height of his strength, could wrestle control of the ring away from Sauron.
Yeah, no, this is a fundamental thing. Sauron in the books fears Aragorn purely because he is Aragorn.
Because Aragorn could take up the ring.
Yeah.
And there's no sense in the films that Aragorn is that big a deal. Sure, he's Isildur's heir, but we don't spend the time to understand what that means.
Yeah. Yeah, in the film, they sort of switched the focus a bit, right? They're like, Sauron is a little bit afraid of Gondor being united by a king. Which is true in the books as well, but in the books it is much more, Aragorn is so badass that Sauron's just a bit afraid of him.
Yes, absolutely.
Because this guy has been waging war for ages and just, yeah.
But he's also the culmination of, basically Finway's bloodline, right?
Well, yes.
It's
the true king of Gondor.
Yeah, absolutely. Sort of vested in Aragorn is all the strength of all men and elves ever, essentially. He's special, fundamentally. And the sense that you get from the films is that he's not that special.
Yeah,
he's a bit special. And you have that conversation that he has with Eowyn, where she's like, "Wait, how old are you?"
Yeah.
He goes, "Oh yeah, I'm 86." And she's like, "You're one of the Dunedain." But you don't. Woo! But it's like, yeah, no, this guy is like Elros come again.
Yeah, and for cinematic reasons, they essentially give him the same sort of starting point as Frodo, right? It's like, this is a character at the start of their heroic journey, which they will seek to complete by the end of this, epic. Whereas in the books, it's like, this is Strider. He's a badass. He's going to be king of Gondor and Arnor. And he will lead you, because he can.
This is the guy who will reforge the two kingdoms anew and rule wisely and well for 400 years. Like, you're looking at Middle-earth Jesus type thing.
But this is where I think, right, the fact that they introduced Arwen early on makes a lot of sense. But then they completely get wrong, and I think this is something the films do get wrong. They get the whole dynamic between Arwen and Aragorn wrong, and Aragorn's motivation, they get it wrong.
Yes.
Right? The only reason, well, not the only reason, I'm sure, but essentially Aragorn it's a retelling of Beren and Luthien, right? Which
absolutely.
Tolkien was very stuck on that, but Aragorn just really, really loves Arwen, and he wants to marry her, and the classic stories. And Elrond's like, yeah, sure, but you can only do that after doing this impossible thing. Much like Beren, like, go and get a Silmaril.
Go get a Silmaril. Go be king of Gondor.
And Arnor. That's Elrond's request. Like, just become king of Gondor and reawaken the old kingdom of Arnor. And then, yes, you may marry my daughter. And so Aragorn's like, yeah, sure, I'll do that.
Be back in 80 years, buddy.
Whereas in the film, it's just sort of, they love each other, and that's like a thing that's going on. Although there's the whole Eowyn thing, which is weird, and I don't really understand it. But I guess they were like, we've had like one woman on screen for 5 minutes. we should add something else.
I also kind of think that the Eowyn thing is, this film has no love interest whatsoever. Like, there's absolutely no relationship or romantic relationship on screen. We can give... everyone's already got a crush on Aragorn. We can just make that canon. It's fine.
Yeah. And it works a hell of a lot better than, introducing Tauriel and some sort of bizarre elf-dwarf love relationship. Although I'm sure if they were to reshoot the films now, they would probably big up Gimli and Legolas.
Bromance. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Yeah.
I don't
think you pull it off with John Rhys Davies, though. I'm not sure.
John Rhys Davies. No. Piss off.
But yeah, that's a change that I don't fully get. I think in the attempt to humanize Aragorn, as you say, they lose the importance of that relationship.
So it's so varied, right? So on the one hand, I think the humanization of Aragorn is almost fundamental to making the films work. Because book Aragorn, I've said it before, book Aragorn would be so hard to get right on screen.
Yes.
But on the other hand, if you don't put book Aragorn on screen, so much stops making as much sense. Like, what is Aragorn's drive to do all of the things that he does if it's not ultimately win Arwen's hand? Like, why is he braving the paths of the dead? Why does he take up the crown ultimately when he's shown he's not sure he wants it? Yeah. I think the change to his character is right, but I think the film perhaps struggles to string a lot of things together as a result of that.
Yeah, because this is, I think you said this before, this is like your favourite change, right?
I think it is my favourite change. I think the Aragorn that we get is a much better Aragorn for the films than book Aragorn, a true book Aragorn representation would be. But I do think it causes its own problems.
I wouldn't necessarily go as far as saying problems. I think if you're Lord of the Rings agnostic and you come in to watch this, it's a very relatable storyline, right? For a classic heroic quest. It's just that there are some bits where you're like, yeah. But again, this is where maybe having Frodo be this young and vulnerable looking hobbit who's brave works, because then Aragorn's like, this guy is pretty brave, I'll just help him. And then
that's true.
It's just the series progresses in such a way, it's like, well, I've come this far, I might as well keep doing good deeds.
No, that's very true, and I don't often consider the change to Aragorn and the change to Frodo in the same context, and I think you're right that they play off each other.
Yeah. And then ultimately, I think they maybe cornered themselves slightly, and this is why Elrond somehow teleports from Rivendell to Dunharrow.
I hate this. I'm sorry, I just do. I don't think this works.
No, it's... But that's what I mean. I think they cornered themselves, because they were like, okay, we've sort of turned Aragorn into like coming to the edge, and like, what's my motivation for continuing on now? Like, this is the difficult bit. And then they're like, oh, we need the sword. We need him to accept his kingship, and then boom, teleport Elrond right into it. Yeah. Like, I like that they reforged the sword at that point. I think it works a lot for this Aragorn. It's just then they were like, how do we merge these two things now?
How does Elrond get from Rivendell to Dunharrow? Like, obviously on a horse, but like
something great eagles.
I suppose the Gap of Rohan is open at that point because Saruman has been defeated.
Yeah, I think we're sort of meant to assume that a lot of this happens very soon after the Fellowship actually leaves Rivendell.
Yeah, Elrond like has a vision and goes, "I know what, actually. Yeah, I should probably forge that sword."
Yeah,
because it probably takes like a few weeks to forge. I don't know. Like, I don't think it's just the work of a night to knock it back together.
But if you, if we're sort of assuming that all the things that are happening in the books are happening now, then it makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
like war going on everywhere, and he's just casually riding away from an elven stronghold to deliver a sword.
I don't think the War of the Ring is like canon in the films. I don't think it's meant to have happened in the same way.
No, I don't think so, because again, it doesn't really add anything, right?
Legolas says it at one point to Gimli, and Gimli says, what I wouldn't give for a legion of dwarves fully armed and filthy, or something, because Gimli is just comic relief at this point. And Legolas says, your kinsmen may have no need to march to war. I fear war already marches on their doorstep. But that's it. That's the whole thing that we hear.
As a matter of fact, I think we're almost meant to, not think that anything's going on. Even though they did film an attack on Lothlorien, I think. Again, it's one of these things that didn't make it into the extended edition even.
Shame Lothlorien sent all of their soldiers to Helm's Deep, then.
That's the thing, yeah.
So what, did they just film Celeborn getting absolutely butchered by orcs?
Well, to be fair, maybe Galadriel and Celeborn like, it's fine, we've got this.
Yeah, you guys go help Rohan. We'll take care of it.
We'll take care of Sauron's army, just the two of us. Which brings us neatly on to a change that is much maligned and misunderstood, I think. Whereas it is just rule of cool, isn't it?
It's much debated, I think. I think you're exactly right. Rule of cool.
Like, we have all these elves, we have all this cool armor. Let's do something with it. It's a shame that they have this close-up shot of someone who clearly doesn't know how to use a bow, firing volleys. You're like, come on, man! They couldn't have picked a better archer to be like front line here.
It's this is obviously the elves at Helm's Deep.
Yeah,
I like it.
I love it. I think it's a great change, even though they all die.
But they take out like 10,000 Uruk-hai, so I think it's fine.
Yeah, but the bit I really hate is just how they charge into a line of pikes.
That's
and
really,
just get themselves
really,
impaled.
really funny. That's really funny. I tend to just assume that that's Aragorn. And he's like, I actually don't really... I've never led an army. Like, I've always been second in command, so I don't know what I do here. Everyone else always shouted charge, so I guess we do that. And I was like, oh, shit.
And what he's learned for next time is to say charge, but avoid the spears.
Charge with arrows. It's really
so I love it, but that there's bits of that are a bit why.
Yeah, but that's got all sorts of, the battle at Helm's Deep has all sorts of weirdness, right? So Legolas, who we've seen putting arrows through orc eye sockets at like 2 miles, suddenly can't hit
a berserker,
the torchbearer.
Yeah,
just shoots him in the shoulder 3 times.
Yeah. What's also great about that is that he's very clearly like right above the gully, and then somehow survives the blast.
Well, because he's awesome and probably like walks down the exploding rocks.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, doesn't touch him because he's special elf.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Haldir. When I was a kid, Haldir was one of my favorite characters. I don't really know why, because he's not really. It's just cool when he marches the army, and I was like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, he obviously dies. But again, it makes sense because Haldir did feature in the first film, and barring that, you have to you have to introduce Erkenbrand and all that sort of business.
Well, that's a change that I really like about Helm's Deep is they keep the cast narrow. So Éomer is the one that Gandalf gathers and rides to Helm's Deep with, rather than sending. It is Erkenbrand, isn't it?
He's the one who comes back, I think. Yeah.
Gather all of the scattered peoples of the Westfold and fall upon the Uruk-hai with Gandalf. Yeah. I think it just works better for Éomer to do that.
Exactly, like the exiled,
Exactly, the exiled prince returning.
Yeah.
Type thing.
Triumphantly returning as well.
Yeah, exactly. To break the sea. I mean, it just works really well.
Like it's already kind of weird that they introduce Hammer, I think it is, right? One of the Rohan captains who then gets killed by a warg.
He's the door guard, isn't he?
Is he the door guard?
He's the guy who takes... That's another reason why giving Aragorn and Duriel late is bad, because you don't have the excellent scene at the door of Edoras where Aragorn's like, you touch my fucking sword and I will kill you.
Yeah. You will insist on calling it Andúril, wouldn't you?
Andúril. You said, well, what am I meant to say?
Andúril.
That's what I say.
No, you keep saying Andúriel, like the angel.
No, I don't. I say Andúril.
Yeah, that's... Well, anyway.
I'm not saying Andúriel. I'm saying Andúril.
That's... Fucking hell, and I'm supposed to be the foreigner here. Anyway, now that is a shame that we don't get that scene. We sort of get it, right, when Aragorn reluctantly hands over his big elf knife, but it's not quite the same as...
It's not the same as this is Andúril, forged from the swords of Narsil. Any hand that draws it but mine will be fucking murdered, mate.
Yeah.
But then so that's Hammer, I'm fairly sure, who then dies on the ride to Helm's Deep, and then we see his son.
Yeah, really random cameo.
Yeah.
So it's a fine Hammer. Blade when everyone in the room and probably all 10,000 Uruk-hai are like, no, mate.
That's gonna snap.
That's a piece of shit.
Yes. But I like that scene. I really like Aragorn taking the time to be like, yeah, no, we'll be fine. That kid is 100% dead.
Oh, 1,000,000,000% dead. He's not in the last shot, so we know he's dead.
No, he's not.
Unless he fled into the caves, in which case he's going to have to live in shame for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
But so, Helm's Deep, by and large, I like the changes a lot.
Yeah.
What I don't like about that whole part of the thing, we're not going to get through all 3 films, are we, today? But
we might need to stop
part 2
after. Yeah.
But the Ents, and I think this is genuinely a change that why you maybe don't really realize it when you're watching the films, but it is quite bad, isn't it? Like there's so why are they portrayed as these things that are completely out of touch with the world, when everything in Middle Earth is supposed to be this connected thing? I mean, everything on Ea, on the world, is supposed to be like this connected thing. Right? In the books, the Ents decide to go to war. In the film, they're like, we're not going to go to war. And then somehow Treebeard gets angry, and then this fully formed line of Ents just march out of the forest. Like, what the fuck is this about?
He gives his great roar, and then all of the Ents are suddenly there. And you're like, wait a second. What?
Psych, we were ready all along. I mean, it's epic. It's a great scene. But it just doesn't make any sense.
No. It was to give Merry and Pippin the win, right? It's to give them the agency to be the ones who get the Ents to go to war, rather than it be decided by the Ents while they're there.
Yeah, but they do that in the books anyway, right? Because it's the news that Merry and Pippin bring that it is Saruman destroying the forest that gets them to declare war.
I think that's
You can do that.
I think,
but okay, fine. I may not disagree with you there, but Treebeard mentions in the film that he's spoken to Gandalf, right? Because he delivers the hobbits to Gandalf.
I told Gandalf I'd keep you safe.
And so you tell me the Gandalf didn't say, "Oh, Treebeard, maybe you should, sort out Isengard and stuff."
Can you please go and? Yeah, I don't think the filmmakers knew what to do with the Ents.
Other than make them look great.
Other than make them look great. Like, they're a bit... We've not had a lot of fantasy, like true fantasy, in the films up till this point. We've had the Balrog. And you've got the orcs and the Uruk-hai, but that's sort of it, and everything else is broadly non-fantastical. And then all of a sudden you've got these like walking trees, and because you haven't had the Barrow Downs, because you haven't had Miramir, because you haven't had Aragorn as this larger than life, and Boromir as these larger than life heroes, the Ents come a bit out of nowhere. Perhaps. I don't know that I entirely believe that, but that's sort of a sense that I get.
I think there's also this idea, for me, it's the pacing is a little bit hard to get a grip of, I think, in that part of the film. Because the Ents are supposed to be really slow, right? The Ent is really slow, but it's happening at the same time as Helm's Deep, which is just, that's like an evening, ultimately, in the film. So you're like, this really long distance by the Ents doesn't feel all that long?
Yeah, it's 3 days from Gandalf leaving, 4 days from Gandalf leaving to Gandalf returning.
Yeah.
Basically. And in that, I don't know. It feels paced badly in the film as well. Like, it literally feels slow.
Yes.
In a way. It's just, yeah.
But it being juxtaposed with the Battle for Helm's Deep is, there's something not quite, that doesn't quite work for me there. But again, it's this whole theme of humanization, right? They've humanized Treebeard in the Ents, where they're like, it's not really our problem, which is quite a human emotion.
No, absolutely.
Our forest is fine.
Then they're confronted with the problem, and that's what jolts them to action.
Yeah.
So it's actually a cutting commentary on people only dealing with, I think, problems like climate change when it directly affects them.
Wow. I mean, you're not wrong. Where does that come from?
I don't know. I just thought of it. It was when you said, people, it's a thing that happens in real life. I was like, it absolutely is. So, it works from a humanization perspective. But I sort of don't need the Ents to be humanized.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you. But again, I think if that's the tone you've gone with for the film, then all of a sudden coming upon this, group of beings that you've never seen or heard about and who are like weirdly clued into everything that's going on, that would also be quite jarring.
True.
Yeah, so it's a change I don't necessarily like, but I think the writers for the films were nothing if not consistent, and I think that really served them well. I think
that's absolutely true.
But we have 9 more things on our list.
We've got the entirety of Return of the King,
but we're over an hour in at this point. So part 2.
I think we just do a part 2, so we can do Return of the King, and we can also do some of the more thematic things like the Gandalf problem, and
the big themes. Like the Gandalf problem. I'm quite proud of that.
Yeah, it gives you 2 weeks to work out what you meant as well. I know exactly. We should do this one. I think we should do this straight after as well. So I think we should do it as episode 57.
I agree.
Just drop it straight up. I think that's the best way to do it.
Is that because you're too lazy to think
Come
about
up with a
other
topic
topics?
for episode 57? Yeah.
Hey, I don't hate it. I'm with you. Well, so sorry, folks, if you were really hoping to hear about our take on Return of the King specifically, but you'll have to come back next time.
Yeah. We've got lots to say about the Army of the Dead.
Oh, many things. And hopefully by that point, Sean will have learned how to say Anduril.
Anduril?
Anduril.
That's what I'm saying. Anduril.
Yeah.
This is so good.
Fucking ass.
But thanks for listening to this episode of Expertise is Overrated. No doubt, we've said some things that were either objectively wrong or downright offensive. As ever, feel free to let us know, rate the podcast and leave us a comment, or drop us an email at expertisesoverrated@gmail.com, tweet us at @zeroexpertise, check out our website expertisesoverrated.podbean.com, or come join us on our Discord server.
If you're lucky, we might just argue with you in one of our upcoming episodes. If you're really lucky, we might call you an idiot. Come back next time for some more absolute nonsense.